Oh, welcome to week 7. I'm James J. I figured I'd change things up a little bit this week. Usually I end up opening things up with a poem or a short story by a writer that I admire greatly in the hopes of getting us in a more literary mindset and to get us thinking about language a little differently than how we hear it day to day. This week I thought I'd change things up. We're in week 7, almost halfway through the semester, so I thought I'd let Jack Kerouac let his voice come through to us from the 1950s and that recording I found on YouTube with him on the Steve Allen Show. I think it's a fun one. What we'll be up to this week is we'll be continuing to use our ear a little bit more to consider that as a revision tool and way of incorporating our own voice and what exactly that means to incorporate our own voice in our own writing. So I thought Jack Kerouac could be fun. Also, historically incredibly important person, and his book On the Road was a massive hit in the 1950s. There he's on the Steve Allen Show. That's back when there were a couple of networks, and things were much different than they are now when thinking about media. In fact, Kerouac wrote about that, and you can see from the video, even just his body language, that he's a pretty introverted guy and shy and a bit nervous to be on that show. He wasn't even originally going to do television, in that he thought it's ridiculous form and no one's really going to watch a TV. So that was back in the day when communication was a little bit different than it is now. And but Steve Allen, since they'd done that recording for that record, and where Steve Allen played the piano, convinced him to go on his show. And of course, Steve Allen on it was more of those old variety shows. And he plays a little bit more of the stooge or the fool than he really is. And of course, Kerouac is very patient and with that sort of foolhardiness that Steve Allen has at the beginning there. And also, even though Kerouac is like I was saying, very introverted, shy person, he's been thrust into this role, this famous role, from obscurity to everyone knows who he is in the country at that point in the 1950s. So he's in this kind of odd position too. But and you can see how his demeanor changes quite a bit once he starts reading his work. He gets much more confident, and things start becoming much more smooth. So I wanted to have Kerouac and Steve Allen bring us into week 7, because we've been talking a little bit about voice, and a little bit about how we construct our voice as writers. And so I thought that would be a good example. Also, I think that Kerouac's he's writing prose, but his use of sound, of course, is very poetic, and they talk a little bit about that at the beginning of the clip. So hope you enjoyed that. We'll let Jack Kerouac kick off this week. So yeah, we'll like I said, that kind of previews a little bit what we'll be up to in a couple of weeks also with our 4th assignment. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let's backtrack a little bit. I'll do what I call in this overall week review, some of the housekeeping, talk about what we've done, where we're at, and where we'll be going. So as far as what we've done, I've had a chance to go through all the papers for week 2, and I was mentioned before they were looking really good. That trend continued. Absolutely fantastic, especially considering we're having to do this online, and very good papers overall. There were some of the general comments that I put on there and things that I was hoping to get folks to look at a little bit more. One of the comments I was making on quite a few papers had to do with verb selection. So if I had some of those comments on your papers, you might want to check out the little mini lecture I'll put at the end of this module on verb selection and why that's important. So I'll include these sort of little mini lectures as I had before. I'll continue to do that throughout the semester and add those based on what we're up to in our writing and that type of thing. Verbs, if you take nothing else from this course, the idea that verb selection is key to strong, effective communication and writing. Take that message. Your verbs are absolutely key. So I'll have that little mini lecture that gets into the details on that. But writing what's called the active voice as opposed to the passive voice, oftentimes we'll take all the objects and details, those type of specifics, and really push them through your story, through your writing. So that's absolutely key and essential for you. And it doesn't matter what field you get into, with the exception if you're going into law school. So I mentioned that not as some sort of kind of clever joke I'm trying to put together, but that is one of the fields where writing in the passive voice, that is using a lot of the is, are, those type of verbs, become useful. because a lot of times, if you think about that in a court of law, who has done what, as far as if someone's on trial, who has done what hasn't yet been identified. So there's just a lot of objects and specifics in a court trial, but we don't know who's done what, that type of thing. So the passive voice is used in that. So that's about the only exception. Although if you think about the dramatic debate at the end, where the defense attorney, the prosecuting attorney, makes the big speech, that of course is an active voice. So anyway, I already have digressed a little bit, but verb selection, that is absolutely key. So I mentioned that in a few of the papers. Overall, there were a lot of terrific use of imagery details, specifically using different senses as far as you were all responding to some sort of visual art. And so it was a blast just to be able to look at that image and then also see the range of creative responses that you came up with, especially smells came into play, sounds, all the senses. There's a lot of tactile senses also came in there, but all five senses came through in a lot of these stories very clearly. So that was a blast. In fact, it was fun to read the papers, and then I would almost allow myself to become distracted by some of the links and some of the places that you end up wandering to get your sources and exploring. So that was great. I had to kind of reel myself back in so that I could actually get these papers to you this semester with comments instead of way down the road. But that was a lot of fun, and hopefully the idea is that was useful for you too, to find a way of going out and finding these sort of these visual art forms for you to hopefully just general interest, but also to potentially respond to as a writer and to work on your writing skills. So I hope that was a useful goal. That I think I mentioned in the prompt, that was sort of half the battle with the assignment is for you to go out and find a good resource, find your research, see what your resources are, find a good source, and then respond to that source. So hopefully that went well. Second papers went great. If you do have questions, by all means, email me, ask me about clarifications. If you weren't sure what I meant on a comment as far as with some part of the writing to work on or whatever it might be, make sure to ask me. Ask me early on in the semester. Towards the end of the semester, we'll revise some of these essays and turn them in your final portfolio. So you can always start revising and working on things. You don't have to wait until the last minute on any of those things. But the main thing is to get the concepts clear, because we keep building on them, right? These writing assignments, hopefully, we'll be writing 7 formal assignments, and hopefully they'll complement each other and work in a way that's logical and makes sense. So make sure to ask me if you have any questions, or even something as basic as if I forgot to include the attachment. I think I forgot that on one. I actually found that a few minutes later and sent it through, but I try to make sure to go through and be very detailed and meticulous with that. But errors happen. So by all means, ask me if there's something that's unclear or something that's, attachment's not there, or something that's missing. Let me know. So that's paper 2, and overall looking great. So yeah. So what I think I'd like to do is talk also a little bit about what we have been reading, and this will cover some of the material that was on the last quiz that you just did, that quiz 4. And so I wanted to scooch back to our flash fiction, not the nonfiction essay, but the flash fiction anthology, which you have, and wanted to talk a little bit about that Pia Earhart essay, as far as I had some quiz questions as far as what she means by load-bearing sentences. And I think the main thing to take out of that, and that I want to emphasize again, is that the notion of that surprise, where you yourself as the writer are surprised, is something that will transfer into your story, and I think generate that sort of surprise, or that sense of suspense, and then some sort of turn that hopefully that will come through to the reader as well. So if something's in there that's probably something that you weren't expecting, or something you're discovering as you're writing, hopefully that will also be of interest to the reader as well. It typically is. So that was the main thing I wanted to mention there. And then also, let me find my spot here. Actually, I'll need my glasses, which reluctantly this semester I've admitted that I do need these reading glasses. So yeah, let me see. I'm going to look at page 130. the first indented paragraph halfway down the page. And Earhart writes, sometimes these load-bearing walls or sentences appear in the early draft and sometimes in later revisions. But I find that one way to get to them quickly is put a time constraint on the writing of a story. I thought this was interesting. We hadn't talked about this yet. A few years ago from McSweeney's, their website ran a 20-minute story writing contest, which turned out to be a come to Jesus for me because it forced me to sit my butt in the chair, write with purpose, get up to the arc, and then down the other side more quickly than I usually would. Right, so that idea of I imagine at least for P. Earhart of kind of lollygagging in a story, it would be something she would identify as not always being beneficial. But she'd give herself, or this contest, this McSweeney's contest, gave you 20 minutes to come up with your story, to write that first draft, and she found that to be a revelation of sorts. No snack breaks because the clock was ticking. No pausing for the internal editor to interrupt the flow of the story. I think that's key, right? No pausing for the internal editor. As all of you know, you've been writing in this class now for 7 weeks, and part of it is getting the words down on the page. I'd mentioned before the use of keeping a writing journal with you is probably pretty helpful, and then that way you're getting the words down on the page. Just as things come to you at any given time, you can go back to that journal and work with it. Sometimes these sort of like a 20-minute get that first draft all down. I refer to those as free writes, just where you're writing nonstop, keeping the hand moving, or either if you're typing, keeping the fingers moving, and the main thing is that you're not stopping to say, oh, is that comma, or should I put a semicolon there? Nah, don't worry about that at this point, right? We're getting it down on the page. So no snack breaks. The clock was ticking. No pausing for the internal editor to interrupt the flow of the story. All I had time for was the story's business. All right. So I just wanted to mention that section too, because we talked a lot about her metaphoric use of load-bearing sentences to discuss the way that there are, when we're going back and revising our stories, that something when we look for those few sentences that were surprising and that hopefully have a lot of the energy for the reader, those are places to go to. But I also wanted to mention that little site. It's just one little paragraph that she talks about the how she gets stuff down on the page, and that is something I think that's useful whenever, because this is a field guide, right? These are different tools and strategies that you can use as a writer as need be. I think that one of the things that's useful is sometimes it's just to set a timer. So I need to get this done, that type of thing. And here we have deadlines. But if you have another classes, of course you have deadlines. Or if you have to get you're writing a grant, or you're writing some sort of business proposal, or your cover sheet for your resume, whatever it might be. Sometimes getting it down, get the stopwatch going, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is, get it down on the page. Yeah, don't edit as you go. Get down the page, and then go back and polish it and see what you have there. But you can shape it on the page a lot easier than when it's in your mind. It's almost like a translation, right? Taking the ideas and translating it onto the written page. So I wanted to point that part out. Also, we looked at Sue Silverman's essay, as far as I include that in the module, because I have the nonfiction. We go in fiction, nonfiction, so I'll make sure to emphasize that non part so that you'll know which one I'm talking about. So I got the nonfiction anthology. You're not required to buy this thing. We're only using a couple of essays in here, so I didn't want to make you spend the $15.95 on this one. So I copied, or I included, electronically copied over the essay from Sue Silverman and put it in the module last week. And I talked about this one a little bit already, so I don't necessarily want to repeat all those sort of concepts as far as that concept of the voice of innocence versus the voice of experience. But I do really think that this is an important essay for you to refer back to when thinking about how to construct the first person, right? So that when we're writing nonfiction, this creative nonfiction, the I, when you say I, that first person I, that becomes a character in the story, right? And so that it's something to think about. You say, well, who am I? Well, I'm always the same, sort of, right? As far as the way that we present ourselves in conversation is different than the way we present ourselves on the page, just because they're different forms, right? Speaking aloud as opposed to getting it down on the page. Think about Jack Kerouac's video where he was so shy when at the beginning of that video for today, and and when he's having the banter with Steve Allen, he seems just so uncomfortable. When he starts reading his writing, his voice, his literary voice comes to him, right? And then much more confident once he gets rolling like that. So it's always that I, that first person, who am I? It can change. And just to also use another example, even if we just think about conversation, if I'm having a conversation with I don't say my mother, if I'm having a conversation with my mom, I'm probably speaking a little differently than if I'm having a conversation with coworkers, or if I'm having a conversation with my kids, or the 8 and 9 years old, as far as just different age level, what they can understand, that type of thing. But you're gonna have a different conversation with different people, different groups, whether you're professional colleagues, or whether it's family, whether it's distant family, close family, right? The how I speak becomes different based on the audience. How we write can also potentially become different based on the audience. So something to think about, that the I, that first person, is not just a given. When you say, when you introduce the I, the first person, into your story, into your creative nonfiction or any work of writing, but whenever you introduce the I, it's not as clear cut and simple as it seems. And Silverman, I think, has a pretty good concise take on that. So something to refer back to there. And so hopefully that will be something that will be pretty useful to think about. Not necessarily when you're in that first draft stage. If you're in that nonstop, get the writing down, whether you're typing or handwriting, however it is that you get your first drafts done. So maybe not that at that part, but it is something fairly early on in the process that you start thinking about, well, who is telling the story? And who is the audience? Right? Who is the imagined or the envisioned audience? So some things to think about there. So that is where we've been. And where we're at now is that hopefully everyone is working away on paper number 3. So paper 3, we're going to be writing this creative nonfiction using all the or any of the appropriate writing skills we've talked about so far in the semester in the first 7 weeks. And we'll also be thinking about how that would work in response to Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. So hopefully by now you've had a chance to view that play. If not, it's about an hour and a half, so make sure to give yourself enough time to watch that all at once. I mean, you could hit pause if you wanted to, but it's I think that's one of those plays that's best just sort of take in all at once. You can imagine yourself with that paper as doing something that's more of a straightforward review, if you want, as far as that you're literary critic reviewing this type of thing. I don't think going 100% just a distant literary critic is that useful, in that this play has been around for 70 years now, and there have been thousands and thousands of people that have written reviews of this play. Rather, I think that it invites itself, because of that sparse, very barren nature of the landscape, the scenescape, as well as the just only a handful of characters in that play. I think it invites you as the audience member to participate. I hope so. I hope that's the response, that you want to become part of that conversation, and maybe even move things along, and find Godot or whatever is going on with the action. But hopefully it invites you to come into that play. So that it would make sense to me to write something that has at least that first person introduced into it as well. So that you could, if you think of, on one hand, you could do something that's a pretty straightforward review, kind of essay, literary type of review. Probably don't want to stay all the way over here. But probably if you start moving the scale, over, and you introduce yourself as a character, whatever the circumstances sort of be, and have it be your response, so that you're writing in response to this play, I think that will be more interesting to you, hopefully. So that you might sit there with 500 words, you might have a paragraph or so, perhaps 50 to 100 words devoted to a little bit of information about the play, but quickly launch into what you find particularly interesting. If there was one character or one scene or one moment or a handful of moments that struck you and either reminded you of a memory or an event that you've had go on, or some sort of speculation or somehow where you felt involved, I think that'll be much more interesting. So I hope that's clear. That is one of the. I think this is one of the ones that it's somewhat difficult. The challenge with this particular assignment is to figure out how you, as the first person at the I, the narrator of the story, fits into this nonfiction story. So you can also think of it. It's a story about you watching a play. Sounds kind of funny, but I'll throw that out there as far as with range of possibilities and speculations. I would anticipate that you would feel somewhat frustrated at various points with this, as far as not knowing which way to go with it. That's part of the design. I think that as writers we have to make decisions with how we're going to respond to all sorts of things. In this case, it's responding to this play. So you can imagine if you were a reviewer for a newspaper and it was very formal, maybe there's not much, there's that range of you doing that. But again, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense, in that there's been thousands of people already doing that. For you to say something unique and different is going to be difficult, if not impossible. What if you interject yourself as that first person I and start speaking a little bit more about your response to the play, and maybe go off on tangents and just let things wander astray a little bit? I think that you'll hopefully come up with something pretty fun. So clear as mud, I hope. So we will see. But do make sure that that is due on the 8th. So that's coming up pretty soon. So do make sure to get. Hopefully you've gotten started on that. Already seen the play, and if you haven't, go on and get started. Get started on that thing. It's hard to think and to get some good writing done if you wait till the absolute last minute. All right. So that's due on the 8th, and I'll send a little reminder on our announcements as well to kind of help nudge people along, because I know it's a busy year. There's all kinds of things going along. So that is our third paper that will be due on October 8th, and I hope that goes well. Have fun with it. Okay, so it's hopefully, if you pull this paper off and hopefully manage to come up with a pretty good response, surprises yourself, makes you think about that play in different ways, perhaps makes you think about either memory from your own past or some event that's in your mind. If it helps you process and think about those things, then hopefully that would be useful to encourage you to think about if there's other absurd or odd plays out there that you've considered viewing. Maybe you feel like now you have a tool or a handle to step into those plays. That would certainly be part of the objective. So that's the second play. Let me look at my cheat sheets to see where exactly we're rolling through, to make sure I haven't skipped any points, and I think we're doing good so far. Let's see where we're heading. The paper 3 is due October 8th, October 23rd. So that's still a little bit, depending on when you're viewing this video, that's still several weeks down the road. But October 23rd we'll have a nonfiction response. So another creative nonfiction piece that's in response to a particular reading. So just instead of a whole play, it'll just be one person doing a reading, whether it be something like how we saw Jack Kerouac at the beginning of this module, where you have a person just not so much singing. I mean, he's got music going on with him with the piano, but that's actually just doing a reading of either fiction or poetry or nonfiction. But something where it's an individual doing a reading, and you'll be engaging in the same sort of creative nonfiction response to that. So it'll be similar to this. I think there'll be some different challenges there with trying to figure out how your voice as that first person narrator fits in response to a reading. So it'll be slight variation, but we'll be still firmly ensconced in this creative nonfiction portion of the class. So that's what we'll be up to at that point. And also, I'm going to give us our reading assignments for this week also, to get thinking about things. I don't want to make it I don't want to load you down with a bunch of stuff, in that you've got that third paper due. But I am going to bring us back to the Flash Fiction Anthology. We're going to read the last essay in there by Ron Carlson. And one of the things that I mentioned, I'll have this in the module and the assignment prompt, is that his style or his voice becomes interesting when thinking about voice, in that he's writing, it's on page 155 in that fiction, the flash fiction anthology, that he has the last word on this anthology, and he's got that tone of just having a conversation with you. So he's writing in a way that's very loose and informal. Both he's making quick references, bouncing all around, going off on side tangents, that kind of stuff. So stylistically, I think it's useful. Imagine if you're sitting down at the coffee shop, and this guy's just sort of talking with you about writing. So if there's references that he makes that are useful, great. If he's kind of seems like he's spinning in the wind, let it go by a little bit. It's the main thing that he does talk about a little bit that I think will connect also back with some of my comments on the second set of papers, is he gives you a little information on what he doesn't see working in writing, and the main thing that he doesn't see working are either cliche or worn out phrases. So as far as the idea of taking a cliche or something that's worn out and turning it on its head, or either cutting it or somehow flipping it around so it's more unique to yourself. Talks about that a little bit, and so I've made some comments on some of the papers too so far. Ron Carlson is going to be writing about that concept, and then also this stereotypes either. He doesn't, whenever there's any sort of kind of the old stereotypes, tropes, conceits, whatever you want to call them, that he wants you to think about those in different ways. He mentions he's got a little section on the how to also rethink some of those old tropes or the old stereotypes. So he has a little paragraph where he talks about the Wolfman, as far as the old horror stories where the Wolfman and the guy turns into the werewolf, and those are popular genres right now, or have been for decades and decades, different versions of that. And so if you were to write about that, it would be something, there's this whole history of people writing about that. So you need to find something that's unique. What would be something that's a way of getting at that concept in a different way as a writer? And this is what Carlson has to say. I'll just get a little paragraph at the top of 156. The moon gave the Wolfman pause, but not for long. See, avoid puns. So he's, like I said, he's trying to be funny. He also received claws. They were longer and more convincing. It is important to note that he did not welcome their arrival. He would look at his hands, remember, and they'd start to change, and then he'd look at the night sky. So the key to all fiction, long or short, is to remember that the Wolfman did not want the moon. Everybody else seems to want it, and it's all over the place in stories. So the way that the moon is used in other stories, it's hanging over every scene after dark. Bring on the moon, moonlight, moon glow, moon over your name the city. But the Wolfman was just a man without it, and fine without it, dreaded it, and even the curtains couldn't help him. How horrible the moon. So and then he goes on to other sort of cliched phrases and that type of thing. But if you are going to use those sort of characters that are well known, then you need to make them unique. You need to make them your own, and figure out other ways of getting into the mindset. For Ron Carlson, he gets into the mindset of the Wolfman by thinking the Wolfman does not love the moon. So if that's the device that makes it unique for him. So something to think about. There's a few pages here. I'll have that writing assignment posted. And then also I'm going to that same nonfiction, so switching to nonfiction book, and I pulled out a couple more pages, just 3 pages, that I'll include because again, you're not spending the $15.95 buying the nonfiction version of this text. So at this textbook, so I'll include that in the module. So those will be a couple of little attachments there, and it's by Barbara Hurd. It's the sounds and sense of sentences. This is, I think, an interesting essay in that we're thinking about voice, and we're thinking about the way that an essay sounds. And Barbara Hurd gets at after that in, I think, a pretty interesting way in that essay. And the main thing, we've talked about this a little bit when we did the recitation assignment, where you were reading out loud for that first paper, recording it, sending it to me. And it gave me a chance to hear your voice and get at least a brief introduction to get to know you. But it also gave you, hopefully, a chance to hear your work out loud, and then also let your ear be involved as an editor for your piece. So oftentimes you're at the end of a story, and you give it that last proofread, and your ear picks up, oh, wait, that's I got a subject verb disagreement there. I got a plural and a singular verb or something like that, whether it be real technical or whether it be just be something along the lines, that sounds off, or that's unclear, right? It's unclear. Let me add a few sentences, or yeah, that's superfluous. I'm off on a tangent. Let me cut that back. But your ear will be a good editor, and so that's something to think about. Barbara Hurd gets after that idea of using sound. We've talked about that already, and it's something for you to think about, I hope. And also, I want you to get used to also this idea of incorporating your own voice and how you speak in your day-to-day life, and how that changes a little bit, sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot on the page, how that also in turn changes based on who your audience is as well, how you might adjust those type of things. So yeah, let me check a couple other notes there. That gets us through our reading assignments, and yeah, so I think that's going to take care of my general comments, my housekeeping comments for week 7. I am going to close just by mentioning that we are almost halfway through the semester. So from the couple of things that I think about as far as in a class, as far as I think there's twofold. Like, you worry about as far as what your grade is, right? Because you're doing this to get a degree, to pass the course, to get the grade that you want, hopefully, and I'm hoping everyone's shooting for an A or a B, but to get the grade that you want, and have that go towards graduating. So that's the main goal. And then also, of course, it'd be nice if you learn a lot of stuff too. So I'm hoping that you learn a lot about writing, and it's enjoyable, and it's worthwhile for you to spend your time and money taking this course. So those thinking about those two things, I want to kind of come out and I guess take the figuratively the wider lens, thinking about what we're up to, and so I do hope that these different writing techniques and these different tools as a writer are useful for you in thinking about not only things for this course and immediately what you need to do, but also that it's useful for your other classes. It's useful whatever you end up doing. I myself have obviously been teaching for a long time, but I also have a bar and a restaurant. And during the pandemic, when these things are shut down and that type of thing, I've been writing grants and using all these sort of skills I have as a writer to actually turn them into money. So I think there's some real functional, practical use to your skills, so that knowing how to write specifically, how to get the most. If you just have 500 words or 700 words, whatever it is, like in a grant, for example, you've got a small space. It's going into an electronic form, and the machine cuts off. So anyone reading that grant or whatever your business proposal, whatever it might be, they're not reading past that. So you've got a finite area to make the most impression and to make the most impactful impression on your audience. So I've used these skills as a writer a whole lot this year in a whole lot of unexpected ways, both for grants, loans, all the kind of stuff with business proposals, that type of thing. So I use that quite a bit, as well as I mentioned before in some previous lectures. I've worked as a journalist and done some writing in that sense. So I've used things in those skills, and then obviously as a teacher. So hopefully it's something that will be of use to you, whether you're going to be whether you're a business major, whether you're going the medical profession, whatever it might be. The ability to take information, process it, and then write a response in a meaningful way in a small amount of space, and to be the one that makes out of 500 applicants, makes the top impression with that small amount of space, or like the top 10, or whatever goal you need to get to get the grant, to get the loan, to get the job, whatever it might be. So I hope that it's useful in that sense. The other thing too that I wanted to mention, again, thinking more generally, do make sure to get a hold of me if you're having any trouble with these assignments, because I do want them to be useful for you, and I think it's worthwhile to think about. We've had a lot of good writing so far in this class. I've been thoroughly impressed, and especially with all the potential distractions out there. It's a tough year with the pandemic. It's a tough year just in general, right? There's all kinds of things going on in the universe and that are, things seem upside down. So hopefully this is a way to focus as far as your own responses in this class, and hopefully it's enjoyable. It's something fun as far as watching this odd play with Samuel Beckett with Waiting for Godot, or responding to the painting or the photography that you found in the previous assignment, whatever it be. I hope that that's enjoyable. But I think it's also worthwhile to give yourself at least a little bit of a pat on the back in that you're doing this class, you're finishing up this class during a pandemic, and no one's done that for 100 years. So I think that's unless there's some real old students that have been doing this even longer than I've been teaching. It's been 100 years since we've had a pandemic going on during a semester. So I appreciate your efforts hanging in there, getting the quizzes done, doing the reading, watching these videos, and it is transferring into your writing. I can see that the quality of writing is high. So thank you very much. Keep up the good work. If you have questions, by all means, shoot me an email. Get a hold of me. With plenty of time to spare, so that you can do your best work, and hopefully it'll be both useful in this class in terms of thinking about grade, but then also a useful skill that you can use other classes, and whatever takes you down the road years from now as well. Okay, thank you so much. Happy writing. We'll talk to you next week.